a storm, a man, and a road that wasn't supposed to exist. December 1944, a lone driver named Adrien Morel disappears into the blizzard, carrying fuel that could save thousands of soldiers. Lost between life and death, every mile he drives pulls him deeper into enemy territory, until one wrong turn becomes the decision that changes history forever. Because sometimes destiny hides in the snow, and courage is just refusing to stop. This is not just a story, but a secret you will never forget. Do you want to discover more secrets like this one? Then subscribe now, or you might miss the next truth. December 17th, 1944. Midnight. The forests of Belgium are buried beneath a blizzard. Snow falls so heavily it swallows the moonlight, turning every road into a white void. The only sound is the distant hum of an engine. A lonely military truck crawling through the storm like a ghost made of steel. Inside the cab, the driver grips the wheel with frozen hands. His name is Adrien Morel, 32 years old, a supply driver for the Allied Army. His breath fogs the glass. The wipers slap back and forth in a desperate rhythm, trying to keep up with the snow, but the world outside is vanishing. The headlights cut through the storm in short bursts, revealing nothing. No signs, no villages, only endless trees bending beneath the weight of ice. Adrien glances at the map spread beside him. It's soaked with sweat and oil stains, edges torn, the ink smudged beyond recognition. He's looked at it 100 times in the last hour, hoping the roads might somehow rearrange themselves into sense. They haven't. The radio is dead. Silence ordered across the front to avoid detection. He has no contact with command, no convoy, no compass that still works. Only instinct. And behind him, in the canvas-covered back of the truck, sits his mission, thousands of gallons of high-octane fuel. Liquid fire meant for American tanks fighting somewhere ahead. Tanks that are cold, silent, and nearly out of hope. He doesn't know where the front line begins or ends anymore. One wrong turn could mean driving straight into the Germans. Every minute he drives deeper into the unknown, the snow grows thicker and the world tighter, like the forest itself is closing in. Adrien's knuckles are white on the steering wheel. His eyes flick to the fuel gauge. Full for now, but he knows how quickly these engines drink. He mutters under his breath, voice shaking from cold and fear. Just 3 hours, that's all it was supposed to be. A distant rumble echoes through the trees. Artillery fire, muffled by snow. He can't tell how far. Can't tell whose guns they are. Somewhere out there, men are freezing, waiting for this very truck. And somewhere else, others are hunting for it. Adrien tightens his scarf, leans forward, and presses his boot on the pedal. The truck growls in protest, but obeys. The forest swallows the sound. One wrong road, one lost man, and history is about to change. While Adrien fights through the snow, unaware of where he truly is, the largest surprise offensive of the war has already begun. Just one day earlier, December 16, 1944, under the cover of darkness and heavy snow, Adolf Hitler launched what would become his final desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. Across the frozen forests of the Ardennes, more than 200,000 German soldiers and 1,000 tanks burst through the quiet hills of Belgium and Luxembourg. The ground shook with engines, the sky flashed with artillery, and the silence of winter turned into chaos. Hitler's plan was daring and insane. He wanted to punch a hole through the Allied front, race west to the port city of Antwerp, and split the British and American armies in half. If the Germans succeeded, they could trap tens of thousands of Allied troops, force a peace deal in the West, and shift the entire war back in their favor. But there was one thing the German high command feared above all: fuel. Their tanks had enough gasoline for just a few days of rapid attack. Every mile forward burned away their future. If they ran out of fuel, the great armored spearhead would stop cold in the snow. They needed to move fast, faster than the Americans could react, faster than the Allies could resupply. And in those first hours, it worked. Entire American units were caught off guard. Roads clogged with retreating civilians, communication lines snapped, and villages disappeared under shell fire. Panic spread. The snowstorm that covered Adrien's truck was the same storm hiding German tanks, rumbling through the woods. But the chaos wasn't just on one side. The Allies were also dangerously low on supplies. Weeks of success in France had stretched their fuel lines thin. Convoys were breaking down, depots were nearly empty, and winter was eating away at morale. Every tank, every truck, every gun needed one thing more than courage: gasoline. And as the Germans began targeting Allied fuel depots, the fear became real. Not running out of men, but running out of movement. Somewhere in that blinding storm, Adrien Morel's truck was crawling forward with thousands of gallons of the very thing both armies were dying for. He didn't know it yet, but his small, lost engine was driving straight into the heart of Hitler's last hope. The storm had turned cruel. Snow hammered down like shards of glass against the windshield, erasing everything beyond a few meters. The forest that had once been a map of dark lines and white paths now looked like a blank page. Every direction identical, every turn trap. Adrien Morel leaned forward, eyes straining through the blur. The wipers groaned with each pass, scraping frozen sleet from the glass. The headlights reflected off the snow so harshly it blinded him more than it helped. He slowed the truck to a crawl. For hours, he'd been searching for a sign, any clue that he was still on the right supply route. But the houses were gone. The road markers were gone. Even the telephone poles that usually lined Allied roads had vanished into the blizzard. Now there was nothing but trees, endless, identical, and closing in. He pressed the brakes and felt the tires skid slightly on the ice. The truck groaned to a stop. For a moment, the world was silent except for the ticking of the engine and the howl of the wind. Adrien reached for his map. The canvas sheet was stiff with cold, its corners torn and edges smeared with dirt. He stepped out of the cab, boots crunching deep into the snow. The cold hit him like a hammer. The wind clawed at his face as he spread the map over the hood, tracing the black lines with a trembling finger. There, the last checkpoint he remembered, a small bridge near Stavelot. From there, the road should have turned south, then east toward the armored division. But the road he was on, this narrow, twisting path, didn't match anything. No villages nearby, no rivers, not even a curve where one should be. He lifted his head and stared into the white darkness around him. The road he stood on wasn't on the map at all. A chill worse than the snow crawled up his spine. What if he had driven off the Allied route hours ago? What if the road itself was a trap, rerouted by the Germans, or worse, led straight into their lines? Somewhere far off, a faint sound echoed. Maybe thunder, maybe artillery. He couldn't tell. Adrien folded the map slowly, his hand shaking. The realization hit hard and heavy. He was alone, completely alone. And if this wasn't on the map, then maybe he wasn't supposed to be here at all. Adrien stood beside his truck, breath rising in white clouds that vanished into the storm. The silence around him was unnerving. No engines, no voices, not even the cry of wind through the trees. Just the steady hiss of falling snow and the pounding of his own heartbeat. He looked down at his boots. They were already half buried. The road behind him had nearly vanished under the drifting white. In a few more minutes, his tire tracks would be gone completely. He was trapped between choices. He could stop here and wait, but waiting meant freezing to death. He could turn back, try to find his way to the last known checkpoint. But if he had crossed into enemy territory, turning back might lead him straight into a German patrol. Or he could keep going, forward, into the dark, toward a road that didn't exist on any map. None of the options promised survival. He opened the driver's door and climbed back inside, slamming it against the cold. The interior smelled of oil, smoke, and iron, the scent of war. He rubbed his hands together, exhaled slowly, and stared through the fog glass. Think, Adrien, think. He pictured the men at the front, the tank crews sleeping beside their frozen machines, the medics patching wounds by candlelight, the soldiers praying their trucks would arrive before dawn. They were waiting for this fuel, waiting for him. He tapped the dashboard gently with his gloved fingers, as if talking to a friend. "Come on, girl," he whispered. "We're not done yet." He turned the key. The engine coughed, stuttered, then caught with a roar that cut through the silence like defiance itself. The truck shuddered but stood strong. Adrien shifted into first gear. The tires spun, caught, and the heavy vehicle lurched forward, carving new tracks into the untouched snow. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, but something deeper, something stubborn, told him to keep driving. The wind howled louder now, pushing against the truck as if trying to turn it back. Branches cracked under the weight of ice. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting, but Adrien didn't stop. He pressed his boot harder on the pedal, eyes fixed on the void ahead. This was no longer a delivery. It was a test of will. And though he didn't know it yet, this single choice, this reckless act of faith, would change everything. The deeper Adrien drove into the forest, the darker the world became. The snow had slowed, but the night had turned black, so black that even his headlights only bounced back at him, painting walls of white instead of showing the road. He switched them off. The truck sank into near-total darkness. Only the soft red glow from his flashlight pulsed faintly across the dashboard, barely enough to reveal the trembling of his hands. The silence was unbearable. Each creak of the suspension, each whisper of wind against the canvas, felt like a gun being cocked somewhere unseen. Adrien drove slower, his eyes flicking between the faint track ahead and the shadows that seemed to move between the trees. Every sound carried meaning now. A crack, maybe just a branch breaking under snow. A distant thud, maybe artillery or footsteps. He didn't know anymore. His heartbeat filled the cab, loud, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. The forest around him looked alive. Branches arched like claws over the road. Frost glittered on bark like tiny watching eyes. The wind whistled through hollow trunks in tones that sounded almost human, a whisper, a call, maybe a warning. Adrien tightened his grip on the wheel. "Keep going," he muttered. "Just keep going." Then he saw it. A flicker of light, far ahead through the trees, soft, yellow, wavering. A lantern? A fire? Or headlights? He froze. If it was German, even one patrol could end everything. The truck, the mission, his life. If it was American, it could be salvation. He slowed to a stop and killed the engine. The sudden quiet roared in his ears. His breath fogged the cabin windows as he leaned forward, staring into the dark. The light flickered again, then vanished. Nothing. Only the forest breathing. Adrien reached for his sidearm. The cold metal felt foreign in his hand. He had never fired it outside of training. He waited. 1 minute. 2. And then, a sound. Low. Heavy. Metallic. Engines. Tank engines. Somewhere beyond the trees, their deep rumble rolled through the night air. Too far to see, too close to ignore. Adrien's chest tightened. He couldn't tell. Were they German panzers, hunting through the woods, or American Shermans? Lost like him? He didn't know. He just knew one thing. Staying still could kill him faster than moving. He turned the key again. The engine grumbled awake, and the forest swallowed him whole once more. The road split into three. 3 narrow, frozen paths disappearing into darkness. No signs. No tracks. Nothing but snow and silence. Adrien stopped the truck at the fork, the engine humming low, exhaust curling like smoke from a dying fire. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The cold bit into his skin through his gloves. His boots sank deep into the snow with a muffled crunch. He shone the beam across the trees. Left path, tight, twisted, the branches almost touching. Right path, steeper, uneven, disappearing into the black. Middle, straight, but completely empty. He swept the light along the nearest tree trunk, searching for anything, a number, a direction, a mark. And then he saw it. Under a crust of frost, half buried in ice, something faintly glimmered. He stepped closer, scraped the bark with his knife, and froze. There it was, a faded white star, the kind American supply convoys painted to mark safe routes. The paint was chipped, nearly erased by snow and time, but it was real. For the first time in hours, hope surged through him. Someone, maybe days, maybe weeks ago, had been here. Someone who knew where this road led. Adrien let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," he whispered into the storm, as if the mark itself had answered his prayers. He turned back toward the truck, the beam of the flashlight trembling in his hand. The choice was clear now. The middle road. He climbed into the cab, started the engine, and eased the vehicle forward, tires crunching fresh snow as the forest swallowed him again. But as he drove deeper, the air began to change. The wind carried a new smell, sharp, acrid, heavy with metal. Burnt oil. He frowned, lowered the window, and the stench hit harder, unmistakable. Something had burned here. Recently. Then he saw it. A shape on the roadside, barely visible under the snow. The skeleton of a truck, twisted and blackened, its canvas roof torn away. A few meters ahead, another. A Jeep flipped into a ditch, windshield shattered. Adrien's breath caught in his throat. No movement. No bodies. Just the silent remains of men who had driven this same road and never returned. The hope that had flickered moments ago began to fade. Still, he pressed on, because now he wasn't just following a road. He was following ghosts. Adrien's truck rolled forward slowly, its tires crunching through the snow-covered road lined with shadows. The smell of burnt oil still clung to the air, thick and bitter. Every turn of the wheel felt heavier, as if the forest itself were testing his resolve. Then, through the curtain of snowfall, he saw something, faint shapes in the distance. Mounds of snow that looked too even, too deliberate. He squinted, leaned forward, and froze. Barbed wire. Sandbags. A trench, half buried under white. Before he could even think, a shout ripped through the silence. "Halt! Password!" Adrien's heart stopped. His hands flew up instinctively. The truck's engine idled, rumbling low like a growling beast in the cold. His mind raced. The password, what was it? He'd heard it days ago, at the last checkpoint, a word shouted between guards and drivers. He searched his memory desperately, snow swirling around the cab. Then it came back, faint but clear, a single word. Philadelphia. There was a pause, long enough to feel like forever. Then another voice answered, calmer this time. "Advance and be recognized." Adrien exhaled so hard his breath fogged the glass. Slowly, he released the clutch and rolled forward. From the trench ahead, helmeted figures rose, rifles aimed, silhouettes against the snow. As he came closer, one soldier stepped into the headlights. The dull green of an American uniform glimmered beneath layers of frost. The man's face was gaunt, eyes sunken, lips cracked from cold. "Jesus," the soldier muttered. You scared the hell out of us. We thought you were one of them. Adrien killed the engine and climbed out, his legs stiff from hours of tension. He raised both hands. I got lost, he said through chattering teeth. I was delivering fuel for the armor division. The soldier blinked. You came alone? Adrien nodded. The man stepped around the truck, wiped frost from one of the metal drums, and whistled low. High-octane fuel, he said softly. You have no idea what you just brought us. Adrien looked around. Exhausted faces stared back from the trench. Young men, barely more than boys, their rifles slung over numb shoulders. Tanks behind them sat buried in snow, lifeless, waiting. Until now, one by one, the soldiers began shouting orders, dragging hoses connecting pumps. Engines coughed, sputtered, then roared awake. The sound echoed through the forest like thunder returning to the earth. Adrien stood motionless, snow melting on his face, realizing what had just happened. He hadn't found salvation. He had brought it. For a moment, the frozen outpost exploded into motion. Men who had been half dead from exhaustion suddenly came alive. Boots pounded across the snow. Metal clanged. Voices shouted orders over the wind. Adrien stood beside his truck as soldiers swarmed around it, fumbling with hoses and pumps, their hands stiff from frostbite. Every drop of fuel mattered. Every second counted. He watched as they pried open the first drum. A splash of golden liquid caught the light of a lantern. Gasoline, pure and precious. The air filled with its sharp, sweet smell. It was the scent of life returning. Move, move, an officer barked. Get it into the Shermans, now. One by one, they rolled the fuel lines out to the tanks buried under snow. For 2 days, those machines had been silent, their engines frozen solid, their crews sleeping beside them like tomb guards. Now, hands trembling with urgency, the men refueled them. Adrien climbed onto the truck step, watching through the storm as the first engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared awake. The deep growl of power cut through the blizzard like thunder. A cheer went up from the trench, small at first, then louder, echoing into the trees. Another engine started, then another. The entire valley trembled as Sherman tanks shook off the ice and came back to life, one after another. Their exhaust pipes spewed smoke and flame, their tracks grinding against the frozen ground. The sound was deafening, mechanical heartbeats thundering in the night. Adrien felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from awe. He could see the faces of the soldiers lit by the glow of engines and fire. Tears froze on their cheeks as they smiled, shouted, slapped each other on the back. Not because they had won, but because they could fight again. A young private passed by, grinning as he shouted, You brought us back, mister. You just saved our hides. Adrien smiled faintly, too numb to speak. His legs shook, his fingers raw and bloodless, but inside a warmth grew, small, fragile, but real. The officer from before approached him, eyes shining through the frost. We thought we were done, he said quietly. No fuel, no hope. But now, he looked toward the line of tanks, rumbling in the distance. Now we stand a chance. Adrien turned to the horizon, where the snow had started to thin. Somewhere beyond those woods, the enemy was coming. But for the first time in days, the Americans were ready. Dawn broke pale and colorless over the Ardennes. The snow had stopped falling, but the air still shimmered with cold, a deadly metallic stillness that felt like the breath before a storm. Adrien stood near the trench, eyes fixed on the tree line. The tanks he had refueled during the night now crouched in position like sleeping beasts, their turrets glistening with frost. The ground trembled faintly beneath his boots. It wasn't the wind. It was something coming. Then it began. A low, distant rumble, faint at first, then growing deeper, heavier, rhythmic. Engines. Dozens of them. German panzers. They were coming down the road, moving fast, expecting silence, expecting American tanks that were empty, soldiers too weak to fight. The German plan was simple. Crush the last defenders, take the fuel, and push straight toward the heart of Belgium. But what they met instead was fire. The first American Sherman opened up with a blast that shook the forest. The shell screamed through the trees and tore into the lead German tank. A second later, it erupted in a fireball that lit up the valley like daylight. Then came another shot, and another. The ground exploded with sound. Engines roaring, guns thundering, tracers slicing through the morning haze. From the trenches, soldiers yelled and fired rifles, their voices drowned beneath the fury of war. Adrien ducked beside his truck, the shockwave rattling his bones. Smoke and snow mingled into a single storm of chaos. But through it, he saw the impossible, the tanks he had brought back to life fighting as if resurrected from the dead. The German advance faltered. Confusion rippled through their ranks. They hadn't expected resistance here, not this strong, not this fast. The panzers tried to maneuver, but the narrow roads trapped them. One by one, they were hit, burning, rolling, collapsing in the snow. In less than an hour, the German spearhead in this sector was broken. Their surprise was gone. Their momentum shattered. Adrien gripped the truck door, heart pounding. He realized that his wrong turn, the road that wasn't on any map, had delivered the one thing the Americans needed most exactly when they needed it. His mistake had become a miracle. As the echoes of gunfire faded, an officer shouted over the smoke. "They're retreating. They're falling back." The men cheered. Tanks rumbled forward again, their treads crushing the frozen ground that had once been their prison. Adrien closed his eyes, trembling, the smell of fuel and fire still thick in the air. He hadn't fired a shot, but somehow he had helped turn the tide of war. The war ended months later. The snow melted. The forests of Belgium grew quiet again. The burned-out tanks were cleared from the roads, and the soldiers who survived moved on to other fronts, other battles, other storms. But for Adrien Morel, the story ended where it had begun, behind the wheel of a truck. When he returned home to France in the spring of 1945, there were no parades waiting for him, no cameras, no medals pinned to his chest. He stepped off the transport train with a single duffel bag and a limp in his right leg from weeks of frost and exhaustion. The town was the same, gray rooftops, narrow streets, and the faint smell of rain on cobblestone. Only he was different. He had seen the edge of the world and kept driving past it. He found work again, hauling lumber and supplies, just another man among thousands who had survived and come home. Sometimes, on long drives, he would glance at the horizon and remember the sound of tank engines roaring back to life in the snow. The cheers, the warmth of hope returning to frozen men. Then he would blink, shake his head, and keep going. He never told his story to anyone. Not his wife, not his friends. To him, it had just been a long, hard night, a bad road, and a lucky turn. Years later, when his hair had turned white and his hands trembled slightly from age, his grandson came home from school with a question. "Grandpère," the boy asked, "were you in the war?" Adrien smiled softly. "Yes." "What did you do?" He hesitated, staring at the window, at the distant road stretching past the village, shimmering under the afternoon light. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know I was saving people. I just knew they were waiting." The boy didn't understand then, but he would someday, because courage isn't always loud. It isn't medals or speeches or the sound of victory. Sometimes it's a man alone in the dark, driving when every sign says to turn back. Adrien Morel was never called a hero, but the tanks he fueled rolled into victory. The soldiers he reached lived to see home. And the war that could have turned stayed frozen in the snow, because one man refused to stop. Sometimes history doesn't need a savior. It just needs someone who keeps going when the road disappears. Imagine one man's wrong turn changed the course of history. If he had stopped that night, the war might have ended differently. The world itself might have changed. Now tell me, if you were in his place, would you have kept driving or turned back? Write your answer in the comments, and tell us which city you're watching from. And if this story made your heart race or gave you chills, then subscribe right now, because the next story hides another truth that will shock you even more. Don't just watch history, uncover it.